wanted to talk this morning about the significance in Jewish history about the 20th of Sivan. So I want to break up what I'm going to do into three different sections. First of all, just talk about the history, what happened on this day. Unfortunately, it's tragedy, not happy events, but talk about the tragedies that occurred on the 20th of Sivan. I know we're a week late. We're now the 27th of Sivan. 20th of Sivan was a week ago. But to talk about the significance of that date, then talk about how at the time they decided to commemorate the 20th of Sivan, and then at the end just talk about how that's relevant to discussions that came up in the 20th century, primarily post-Holocaust, relating to Yom HaShoah. How can we commemorate tragedies that occur to us nowadays? So there are two tragic events that took place on the 20th of Sivan. And I'm going to summarize what happened on those days, but I want to start by looking at some primary sources just to get an idea of the descriptions of what happened on those days. So I want to begin not on the first page should say the title 20 Sivan, the Forgotten Fast Day. If you turn to the second page, there are two photocopied pages. So on the second page, you should come across at the top of the page is to say Gzerot Ashkenaz B'Tzarfat. This is part of a book put out by, I think his name is Abraham Haberman. He's an academic dealing with the medieval time period. So Gzerot Ashkenaz B'Tzarfat talks about different decrees and different tragedies that befell the Jewish people during the medieval ages, obviously primarily dealing with issues relating to the Crusades. And so from here I just want to read part of a first account of what happened in the year 1171 in the city of Blois in France. And this is coming from, the source that we have here is a letter from the community of Orleans, which was a very strong Jewish community. I think many of the Baalei Tosfot who came from that, who wrote the Tosfot commentary on the Gemara as well as other books, came from this city. It was a very prestigious city in the country of France. So down, not so far from Orleans, there was a small community called Blois. So what happened there? So he writes as follows, just to give a flavor of the way they're writing and just to see the style of how they write. And you see, I think it's a similar style. I don't know if anybody here has ever read any of the chronicles from the Crusades. The First Crusade Chronicles, the Second Crusade Chronicles, it's written in a very similar style. So if you have on the sheet the second paragraph with the big letters Nachnu, I'm going to translate as I go along. It's written in poetic Hebrew, so it might be a bit difficult to translate the exact words, which I just give an idea of what's going on, but just to hopefully appreciate the Hebrew. Nachnu Kahal Orleans, referring to the congregation, the community in the city of Orleans. Aleinu Hevias Agala, Hinenu Moakim Tachteha, Asher Bipsha'enu Kozot V'chatotenu, referring to all the sins that took place. What happened? V'Hashem Bikrobav Nikdash, and due to the sins that took place, God sacrificed. There were people taken as a sacrifice. Ume'az Natan Amolim Shisa Vayatzet Ish B'Mikdashenu, from the time that a fire was put to our temple. Lo alu la'ishim kodshe kodashim ka'elu, from the time the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed 1,000 years earlier, there have been nobody who has been given as a korban to you. Lo alu la'ishim kodshe, nobody as these ones who were killed, we'll see why they were killed, but nobody who was killed in Blois in France, there's been nobody as great as these be given as a korban since the Beit HaMikdash again was destroyed 1,100 years earlier. Vaya'alu malachei Hashem belahab 31 malachim. There were 31 angels who were taken from our city on this day. Srafim omdim lo mima alo asher, and there were angels above them. Asher ba'amur hatzarim hotziu ma'israfum, and once the evil enemy said, let's take them out and let's kill them. Amrum nikra lahem v'nishalat pihem. Let's ask them before we kill them. Ulai Yamiru kodam below yael. Maybe they'll give up on their religion. Maybe they'll convert to Christianity and will spare their lives. Vayanu ki ish echad, and the people of Blois, the Jews of Blois, responded, Lo ki belokenu nivdak. No, we're going to stick to God. We're going to cling to God. Belokei Yisrael. Ve'otoni ra b'chol lev b'chol nefesh. And He we will fear. Heim mutzaim, and they were taken out. Therefore, Heim Hishivu el levavam, and again they said, Ula yirach lebechad mehem. Maybe they said now that it's coming down, they're going to be killed. They'll say, maybe we'll change our minds. So Amru Isha Lachiv, they said one to another, Hamin Haisha Zen Echarad, should we fear this evil man who's out to decree this evil decree against us? Halo Zeh Yom Nivcharnu, we were chosen. Ko Amru Belachtam, so they said, Hishamru Lachem Penif Delavavchem. Guard yourself lest your heart stray out. Chizku v'nitchazek v'yirat yotzreinu. Right, be strong in yourselves. Let our death be an atonement for all of our sins. Ve'eluhen chataot v'hashamot hatzibur asher bahem yitkapru kol Yisrael ki ishei Hashem lechem elokeihem ve'hem rakrim ayukodesh v'yarach. So very often you see here, what is the terminology that they use? Very often when you talk about those who are killed, al kiddush Hashem, those who are killed for sticking and believing in their Jewish heritage. So very often, if you read these chronicles, they often refer to them as a korban, because they want to look at it, if people are just killed innocently, then almost they say, what's the point? But when you start bringing the imagery of a korban, when you bring the imagery of them being brought to atone for our sins, I think they're trying to bring more purpose into the death. Not that they really need more purpose, but when the authors are trying to describe their death to try to show how great they were, they often bring up the imagery of korbanot, of the sacrifices in the temple, to give them even that much more importance. And then he says, when does this all take place? Vayarach Hashem et reach hanichoach b'revi'i b'Shabbat. This all took place on Wednesday, be'esrim l'chodesh Sivan, on the 20th of Sivan, bishnat tat kala liprat. That's referring to the Hebrew date of 1171. So in 1171 there were 31 Jews killed in the city of Blois. And he continues, V'ra'ui hu l'kovot tzom l'chol b'nei amenu. And this is a day which would be a fast day for the entire Jewish people. This should be even greater than Tzom Gedalia. Tzom Gedalia, one of the 4 fasts that we have that commemorate the destruction of the Beit Midrash, which is already mentioned in the time of the Nevi'im. This fast, almost 1700 years later, is going to be greater than the tragedy of Tzom Gedalia. Ki Yom Kippurim hu. This is the day of Yom Kippur for us. So what happened? Why were all these Jews killed? So just to turn to the next page. So we see these 31 Jews were killed in Blois. And so this letter is written by, again, the congregation of Orleans. Who was talking about this fast? Who was the one who promoted it and said it should be a fast day that should be observed by everybody? It's actually Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam, who's Rashi's grandson, living at that time period, a very well-known one of the Tosafists, decreed that this should be a fast day for all the communities. He sent out letters decreeing that this should be a fast day. Unfortunately, Rabbeinu Tam passed away 2 weeks later. I saw some who say, due to the tragedy, it was so much for him to bear that ended up, he died from the emotion only 2 weeks after declaring this fast. So what happened? If you go to the next paragraph on the page, towards the second half of the page, we're starting from the word V'sibat. V'sibat hara'ech echaita, why were these 31 Jews killed? Ki b'chamishi yom ha'mekulal ba'erev mishechashecha. It was Thursday night, it was dark. Halach Rabbi Yitzchak Rabbi Elazar mi Blois. Again, this a Jew from that town. Vayamashkesu so banahar. He went to the river to feed, to give his animal to drink. V'haya nosei et ora bira b'cheko. And he was carrying some leather pouch almost in his hands. Shahaya meviya mi beit iron echad. He brought it from the tannery. B'nishmat echad mishulei ha'ora shekorim po. And somehow this piece of leather that he was carrying was sticking out from underneath him. So you could see it if you were walking behind him. So what happened? A non-Jew came from the city also to give his animal, his horse, to drink. When he saw so the horse of this animal saw this piece of leather sticking out. I'm not sure why he was so scared of it, but he jumps away. He couldn't give his horse what to drink that morning. So he didn't say anything. He didn't say anything to this Jew who was there, but I guess he was probably upset that he came to give this horse to drink and he couldn't fulfill his task. So what does he do? He comes back to his master and he says, Hayadata ki pagati bi ploni ayidi. I saw a Jew at the river, and he was drowning a child. And he said, my horse saw it and he was scared and he ran away. This is one of the first cases, not the first, of a blood libel in the medieval ages. So this servant from this town was coming to bring his horse water. His horse got scared, maybe out of unclear why exactly. Maybe just took the opportunity to, now I have an excuse to get back at the Jews. Claims a blood libel, claims that this Jew is at the river drowning a child. And obviously his master, I'm not going to read the continuation, the master talks about he was upset with some woman in the community who was, I don't know, they had some sort of dealings that obviously weren't very pleasant, and he wanted to get back at her, obviously in a very, very tragic manner. And they ended up taking out the Jews from the city, killing the 32 Jews in the city. And as a result, again, so the terrible tragedy in the city of Blois as a result of this blood libel, so they decreed this fast. We'll come back to that. So that is on the first tragedy that took place on the 20th of Sivan. What's the second tragedy? Second tragedy takes us forward to the year 1648. 1648, familiar with Jewish history, was the beginning of the, maybe different ways to pronounce it, the Khmelnytsky massacres in Ukraine and Poland, where many Jews were killed. You see different accounts. So I brought from you a book, Yevain Mitzula. Yevain Mitzula, and this is on the last page on the source sheet. Yevain Mitzula was written by a Rabbi Nata Hauber in the 17th century, somebody who lived to see these tragedies. Now, if you read some of the academics nowadays, I didn't read it, I just saw some of them mentioned, they're not sure how historically accurate this account actually is, and he might say that there were more Jews who were killed who actually were, but the figures run anywhere from 100,000 to 500,000 Jews killed in these massacres in 1648 to 1649. So who was Khmelnytsky? He was what they call it, he was a Cossack, and he was rebelling against the Polish government. He actually rebelled, he was taken prisoner rebelling against the Polish government. The thing was about to be put to death, and the leader of Poland died, and he managed to free himself. It's how such small things could affect so many people. And then he led this massive revolution, taking together and obviously taking out most of it on the Jewish communities in Poland and Ukraine in those years. And here I just want to read for you a description he gives of another event which took place on the 20th of Sivan. He says, so this is starting at the top of page where it says 36, Yevain Mitzula, with the fourth word on the top line. It says, B'chein shalach Chemiel is Khmelnytsky, Yimach shemo rosh echad, Sorer HaYehudim, right? That's the phrase used to describe Haman. So putting him in the same light. Al Kilos HaKodesh Aniskar La'el, and he came together, V'imot Keshesh Meot Ish Shofei Cherev, he came with 600 people bearing swords, V'chatav LaRoshei Anshe Ha'ir Sheyu Be'ezram, and he recruited the other people living in the city. V'Anshe Ha'ir Hikdimu Naseh L'Nishma, and the other non-Jews living in the city obviously joined together with him, L'Sayam B'Kol Chocham, Lo Mifnei Avatam, they didn't love the Cossacks, El B'nei Sinat HaYehudim, the anti-Semitism, because they hated the Jews, they were going to join with them. Vayhi b'yom dalid kaf Sivan, and it was Wednesday here too, Wednesday the 20th of Sivan. Bawa kazakin samuch la'ir Nemirov. They came to the city of Nemirov. This is in Ukraine. Vayiru ha'Yehudim et ha'chayil me'erachok ve'echered libam, and they saw these troops coming and they were scared. Aval lo ha'yu yodim, but they didn't know. Im he me'am Poland, were they the Polish army who weren't attacking the Jews? O me'am Kazakin, or were they the Cossacks? Khmelnytsky, we're going to have to kill them. Afal pichein halchu kol ha'Yehudim, but they were scared. They saw people coming. They went to the stronghold, and they hid themselves in this stronghold. And he goes on to continue. I'm just going to summarize what happens at the rest. What happens? How do they trick him? So the Cossacks put up flags, Polish flags. So once they put up the Polish flags, they thought, oh, it's our friends who are coming here. They opened up the stronghold, and they massacre. This is the first massacre, the entire city, again taking place on the 20th of Sivan. So these are the two unfortunate tragedies, terrible tragedies that took place on the 20th of Sivan. Now what was the response to these tragedies? So the response was, as I mentioned before, setting up fast days. So if you could turn back now to the first page, the source sheet. So here again, here's a quote which we saw most of it actually in the letter from the community of Orleans. It's translated into English. This is source number 1. So this is written by Reb Ephraim ben Reb Yaakov Mibon. So he was a poet, a Talmudist who lived again in this time period, going back to the 1171 in that time period. And he quotes from here from Rabbeinu Tam again. Haravi'i b'Shabbat. You can follow along in the English. I'm going to read it in the Hebrew and I'll translate. Haravi'i b'Shabbat esrim b'Sivan. Again, the 20th of Sivan. Here it's Dalit Alafim V'Tat Kala. So it's the year 4931 in the Jewish calendar, which is 1171 in the secular calendar that we have. Kibluhu kol kehilot Sarfat v'yam v'Rainos. Everybody accepted it. The communities of France, England, and the Rhineland. So all of Europe, Jewish Europe, Ashkenaz Europe, accepted this fast day. L'yom safed v'tanit. They accepted it as a day of mourning, a day of fast day. They ratzon nafshan. U'v'mitzvat hagaon Rabbeinu Yaakov ben Harav Rabbi Meir. Again, this is coming from Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam, one of the greatest rabbis, declared this fast, and everybody accepted it upon themselves. Asher katav alehem svarim v'hodiyam. He wrote these letters telling everyone, Ki ra'uihu lekavot tzom l'chol b'nei iman amenu. This should be a fast day for our entire community. V'gadol yet tzom hazem mitzom Gedalia ben Achikam. It should be greater than Tzom Gedalia. Ki Yom Kippurim hu. Because it is a Yom Kippur. And he continues. So that is the fast day that was set up in the time of 1171. Now, seemingly, it might have been observed for some years, but it didn't seem to have been observed for very long, even though it was accepted by these communities. Why not? The reason it was not accepted seems to have been because this was right in the middle of the Crusade period. So as tragic as this one event was, there were many more tragedies that took place in the years to come. Probably throughout all those tragedies, this one, you hate to say it, maybe lost some of its meaning almost, now that there were so many others to commemorate at the same time. So seemingly it was so it's unclear exactly how long it was observed for, but this fast that was set up the 20th of Sivan was lost. But then, again, came what happened. The years turned later, and then it came to the year 1648, 1649. These massacres came to an end, and then the year 1650. So how did the rabbis in that time period, how are we going to commemorate this day? So from here I brought a source, the Sharei Tshuva. The Sharei Tshuva is a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. So this is the last, in the Shulchan Aruch he talks about, he has his section there, Rabbi Yosef Karo talks about discussing the Jewish laws, has a section there talking about the fast days. And right at the end, it talks about different fast days that people have accustomed to fast that none of us, I don't know anybody who ever fasts on these days today, that Aaron died, different people died. You can see what the Shulchan Aruch talks about. So in that context, they mention this fast day as well of the 20th of Sivan. So if I'm going to read here again, you can follow in the English. I'm going to read in the Hebrew in source number 2. That they mentioned that there's a custom to fast on the 20th of Sivan. Ayin b'Magin Avram. So look in the Magin Avram. Le'el Siman Taf Kuf Samech Chet. The Magin Avram is one of the commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch, and he writes, Shapam, what happened? Chal Kab Sivan Be'erev Shabbat. So the 20th of Sivan fell out on a Friday. V'haya Brit, and there was a bris in the community. V'tziva harav. So now what do? It's a bris. You normally don't but it's a mitzvah to eat at a bris, but at the same time it's a fast day. V'tziva harav she'elchu al suda. The Rav of the community said, go to the meal and eat as part of the bris. Why? Shelo yimtza mi she'elech balayla. You're not going to find anybody else to go eat with him at night. It's important that you have a suda mitzvah as part of his bris, so go eat there. But mashma, the implication is, belav hachi mechuyavim lehafshlim af b'erev Shabbos. The implication was, even on a Friday, where maybe you'll be more lenient for Shabbos, we'll say, no, you're obligated to fast the 20th of Sivan. So he's just describing here, there might be some who were lenient, but here he's describing the fast on the 20th of Sivan. And again, what happened? So if you look on the source sheet here, about 5 lines in, I have 3 dots. I'm skipping a little just to go to the end. The English as well, but the 5th last line of the English section, there's 3 dots. It says, Umasha kavu b'kap Sivan. Why they decide to commemorate the Chiloniki massacres? In Hebrew, they're often referred to as Gzerot Tach V'Tat. Tach V'Tat refer to the Hebrew years. that these massacres took place. So why are they declared on the 20th of Sivan? It took 2 years to hold all the massacres. And even beyond that, because this wasn't the first event to ever take place. This wasn't the first tragedy to take place on the 20th of Sivan, because we know in Shnat Tatkala, again in the year 1171, Haya Gamkein Eit Tzara Yaakov. You should know that in the year 1171, there was another tragedy to befall the Jewish people. So that once that was a day of tragedy, let's commemorate the massacres on the same day. So that's one reason he writes. And then at the end, he mentions another reason. The last few words, he says, by the way, you know why he also chose this day? You should know the 20th of Sivan can never, based on our calendar, can never fall out on a Shabbos. Just to think why, because based on the set calendar that we have, Pesach, lo badu Pesach. Pesach can never fall out on a Wednesday, on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So Shavuos, which is the 6th of Sivan, is a day later than Pesach. So if Pesach can't start Monday, Wednesday, Friday, that means Shavuos can never start Tuesday, Thursday, Shabbos. And the 20th of Sivan is 2 weeks after Shavuos. So if the 6th of Sivan can't be on a Shabbos, that means the 20th of Sivan can never be on a Shabbos. So that was an added, the fact that it will never fall on a Shabbos, when you obviously can't fast, they decided to put it on the 20th of Sivan. So how long did this fast? When they reinstituted in the 17th century, how long did this mean? How long were people fasting on the 20th of Sivan? It's unclear here as well. In source number 3, I bring a source from the Mishnah Brura. The Mishnah Brura, Rabbi Shomer Kagan lived until 1933. He wrote the commentary Mishnah Brura, and he writes here, Gam nohagim li, in source number 3, litanot kaf Sivan b'chol malchu Poland. The Polish communities have a custom to fast on the 20th of Sivan Nara Pashte. Different communities do different things, but the custom is to fast. So seemingly even until the 20th century, he's mentioning the idea of this fast on the 20th of Sivan. It's unclear how many Jews were fasting and in what communities they were fasting at the time. So what's nowadays? So if you look in some of the Sfarim, if you look in some of the Halakha Sfarim, some of them will say, you know what, it's better not to schedule a wedding for the 20th of Sivan, because due to the tragedies that took place. So different people do different things. It happened to be last Sunday. I'm sure there were many weddings in the community on a Sunday in June. So I don't know how well thought. If you open up, some communities still have the custom to fast and recite Slicha on the 20th of Sivan. And those who don't, some, they say, try to avoid having a wedding on the 20th of Sivan as well. I read here, I have from here, the Nite Gabriel, Rav Gabriel Zinner, who is a Rav, Hasidic Rav in Brooklyn, so he has many halakha sfarim. So he talks about, I think the Hasidim are ones who are more, observe Kaf Sivan more, and he actually mentions, which I couldn't find anywhere else, this idea that after, the year after the Holocaust, in the, I think 1946, with the Hungarian Jews, whoever was back in Hungary, they reinstituted the fast of the 20th of Sivan to commemorate the death of all the Hungarian Jews as well. I couldn't find anyone else who mentions it. I couldn't find the source that he quoted either, and I have no idea how long. I think especially after probably the 57, after the revolution, I don't know how many Jews were left in Hungary at that time to continue the custom. But it seemed like even to commemorate the Holocaust, they wanted to combine it with these other tragedies to commemorate the day. So those are just a bit of description of the tragedies, how they were trying to commemorate them. Then the question becomes, what in terms of Jewish law, what is our view? Are we allowed to just institute new days of commemoration? Again, we know we have the fast days from the Tanakh. We have the fast days for the Beit Hamikdash. We have the fast day of Tanit Esther. But those are all much earlier fast days. Do we have the authority to institute new fast days, institute new days of commemoration post that time period? So when you look at, and what makes the issue more complicated and more relevant, what's the relevance? The relevance obviously in the 20th century was what I'll say Yom HaShoah. What is the Jewish view in terms of commemorating a day for the Holocaust? So what's the issue? If you look at source number 4 here, I brought here from Kinot we recite on Tisha B'Av. So on Tisha B'Av, we recite one of the Kinot Mi Yitain Roshi B'Mayim. Anybody know what that's talking about, that Kinot? Mi Yitain Roshi B'Mayim is the Kinot that we recite on Tisha B'Av, talking about the Crusades, commemorating all the deaths and the massacres that took place during that time period. And as part of that kina, I'm going to read for you again here in the English and the Hebrew. Simu na al levavchem misped mar lekashra. In English, take this to heart and compose a bitter eulogy. Kishkula harigatam litabelu lihitafra. Their murder is worthy of mourning and placing ash. Kisrifat beit Elokeinu ha'olam abira. Equal to the burning of the house of the God, the porch of the palace. Here's the important word. V'chi ein lehosif moed shever v'tav eira. Because it is improper to add a day of breach and conflagration. And then he continues on, etc. So within this kina eulogy describing the tragedy of the communities destroying the crusade, especially the communities of Worms, of Mainz, of Magenza as well, they decided, thank you, as well, they didn't, what did they do? They didn't add a new day of commemoration. They didn't add a new fast day. There wasn't a new fast day. They knew what days would take place. They didn't add a new fast day. What did they do? How did they deal with it? All tragedies, all Jewish tragedies are supposed to be observed on Tisha B'Av. It's improper to add another day. So on Tisha B'Av, not only do we commemorate the sin of the Meraglim, not only do we commemorate the destruction of the Beit Midrash, we're going to commemorate all Jewish tragedies on that day. Now the question then becomes, what is the status, how important is this, whoever the author of this kina was, how much, could say, weight in Jewish law does this carry? And then how do you square that with the fact that we just talked about the 20th of Sivan, and you have this day, which is this is after the Crusades, or certainly the first one is the time period during, and then certainly in the 17th century is much after. They also, they did institute a fast day, they did institute a day of mourning to commemorate those 2 days. And it's not as much of a question as much as 2 different paradigms. I listened, much of the material I should mention now that I have from here, I listened to a shiur by Rabbi J.J. Schachter. He talked about, one Tisha B'Av, he talked about these different ideas, the 20th of Sivan and the Crusades. And he says, what you're dealing here with is 2 separate models. You seem to have the Crusade model where, no, we're not going to add on a new day of mourning. And what are we going to do? We're not going to say the 20th of Sivan is a new tragedy. We should commemorate 20th of Sivan with slicha and everything on Tisha B'Av as well. Or the other school of thought is say, no, that's not true. That you have that a tragedy takes place that's so horrific that you could add a day like the 20th of Sivan. And these 2 arguments, using this kina here and using the 20th of Sivan as another paradigm, were used halakhically by the poskim in the 20th century. Well, could we commemorate? Could we have a new day for Yom HaShoah? And that's what I brought here in source number 5 and 6. This discussion really began until 1942. The Jews living in then Palestine weren't so aware of what was going on in Europe. And then I think some Jews escaped. They came to Palestine. They started getting word. They realized how terrible things were. And they wanted to know, can they institute a new fast day can they institute a fast day? This was before the war was even over, to commemorate, to recognize the deaths and the tragedies going on in Europe. So Rabbi Yitzchak Levi Herzog was the chief rabbi at the time, so he wanted to do it, and he met with different rabbis. And he was gaining much support for it, and then at the end of it, part of his meetings, he went to the Brisker Rav. The Brisker Rav is Rav Soloveitchik, part of the Soloveitchik dynasty. The Rav Yosef Dov Soloveitchik was at YU, his uncle was the Brisker Rav, the Rav Chaim's son. So he was very, very strong to tradition. So they came to Brisker Rav trying to gain his support. He had a following in Yerushalayim at the time. Could we make a date? Could we add a date to the calendar? And he said, absolutely not. Why not? And he brings from here the keynote for Tisha B'Av. We can't add a new day. We can't add another day of mourning. We're going to remember the Holocaust on the Tisha B'Av as well. Source number 5 here, I just want to bring for you from Yitzchak Levi Herzog, talking about, again, he wanted to promote it. He said, absolutely we should have a day. This is worthy of a day to commemorate it. And what he mentions here in source number 5, B'chutz mikol zeh, and this is picking up in the middle of his tshuva, Hari yesh lanu ma'aseh rav. We have a good proof to allow us to institute a new day of mourning for these Jews. Why? Kaf Sivan, we have the 20th of Sivan. Shegazru vad arba aratzot. That was the council of the lands leading the communities at the time in Europe. in the 17th century, Lihitanot bo, that they already decreed to fast on this day. Uchvar bimei masaot hatzlav nikbaz el yom hatanit, and times of the Crusaders, again referring to the tragedy in Blois. Ela shenishdakach, but it was forgotten, somehow went into oblivion. But now we see here this idea of commemorating new fast days, that the Holocaust was certainly on that same level. It says absolutely we should be allowed to commemorate the Holocaust on, this is even, he's saying it here as a fast day. And what we do nowadays, Yom HaShoah, there's no fasting, there isn't much ritual that goes on with it. But he's saying absolutely yes. Who argued? Many argued. I brought from here Rav Moshe Feinstein. Rav Moshe Feinstein, in source number 6, he argues, and he says, no, it's not appropriate, again, using his paradigm as the Crusades in source number 4, that we shouldn't add extra days. So that, then how do you deal with the Kaf Sivan? That's the big question that's hanging over his head. So why not? So how about Kaf Sivan? So he goes through it here in source number 6, why Kaf Sivan isn't a problem. He says, you know why it's not? Because Kaf Sivan, on Tisha B'Av, we commemorate everything that comes together as part of being in the exile. And he says the crusade that took place, because we were in the exile, that was all a direct result of that. The massacres that took place, you can look, I'm not going to read inside, the massacres that took place in the 17th century, that wasn't part of that. Why? Because A, this was more local, it wasn't against the whole Jewish community, it was only against the European and the Ukrainian, the Polish and the Ukrainian Jews. And he says beyond that, it wasn't the government. It wasn't like the government that pulled out us, it was the rebels against the government. So it wasn't a direct result of us being in the exile. If anything, the government tried to protect the Jewish people. It was those rebelling against the government that were out to attack the Jewish people as well. And Rav Moshe Feinstein says, no, you can't institute a new day. Now the truth is what Rabbi Schachter said, he said, he doesn't really think that, he almost said it, the rabbis weren't necessarily coming to these sources honestly. It's more like they were coming with their conclusions beforehand than using the sources to bolster their opinions. As in, Rav Herzog is somebody who is willing to make the change. He's somebody who was thought it was appropriate, and then after, with that decision in mind, using Kaf Sivan as his proof. As opposed to Rav Moshe Feinstein and others who were maybe a bit more hesitant to institute any sort of change into the Jewish tradition, so they wanted to say no, and then they're kind of using this kina as a support for their proof as well. That really just sums up the issue. I know it's not necessarily the happiest to talk about on a Sunday in June. It should be, if you look at the flyer, it was all colorful, so I apologize a bit about the dichotomy that's going on here, but I thought just important a little bit to talk about the significance of 20th Sivan, commemorating the tragedies, again, in Blois and then in the 17th century as well, seeing how that's relevant in a more general, global sense in terms of how can we commemorate the Holocaust in 20th century, 21st century, where we are now, and then use this obviously as a time to daven and pray that we won't have to have any more tragedies, we won't have to worry about commemorating more days of Yom Evel v'Bechia, but more Yom Yemei Simcha Sason v'Simcha. Everybody have a wonderful day, and thank you.